Welcome, friends, to Cultural Savage, where we are talking about the spirituality of being human. Today, my guest is Jennifer Neyhart. Jennifer has been studying the Bible, theology, and C.S. Lewis for most of her life. As a preacher's kid, she practically lived at church and was immersed in scripture at home and church. In 2009, she earned her master's in English, but in 2014, she sensed a call to go to seminary. She completed her master's of theological studies in 2019 and is now going back to seminary to get her master's of divinity degree at Louisville Seminary. You can follow her on Twitter at Jennifer Neyhart and her website where she occasionally writes at jenniferneyhart.com. Hey, Jennifer, how are you?
Hey, good. Thanks for the introduction, Aaron.
Oh, of course. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. I gotta say, you're way smarter than I am. Well, let's just get that out of the way right here, okay?
I mean, I've earned some degrees. That's, whatever. I enjoy it. I'm a nerd. It's what I do.
Well, that's great. That's great. I love when you get involved with Caitlin about the C.S. Lewis stuff. I just absolutely
Yeah.
find that just absolutely fascinating.
Oh, you're talking about with Kat Coffin?
Yeah.
Yeah. So she's a good friend of mine that we met through a C.S. Lewis colloquium in Indiana. And also we were like two of the only people that were on Twitter at that conference and were tweeting about the conference. So we kind of connected that way. And that was back in 2012, I think. So she's become a really good friend. And we're both big C.S. Lewis nerds.
Yeah.
Scholars, slash I think we've decided that really being a scholar on C.S. Lewis or a lot of other things is really the adult way of being a grown-up fangirl about something, or a fan of something. When you're a really big fan and you just want to study it more and more and dig in.
That's awesome.
So,
No, I absolutely love it. So
yeah.
now we've known each other, I don't know how long on the internets. It's been...
I have it sticking in my head that in 2014 might have been when we did that church and mental health Twitter chat. And I think we kind of had seen each other on Twitter before that, but that's when we kind of started to get to know each other a little bit.
Yeah, that the CXMH with Robert Vore, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good time. It was a good time. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I'm always glad to know you. So our readers, geez, I'm so used to blogging. Wow.
Yeah.
So our listeners know. And so I know, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background, about
Sure.
what brings you to where you're at right now, all that fun stuff.
Right. Well, so my growing up years were all in evangelicalism. As many of us that are kind of connected on Twitter and Facebook at this point, we have kind of similar backgrounds where we started out evangelical, and I'm connected to a lot of people who are still trying to be a Christian, but not that way. So that's been my journey as well. And it was in grad school the first time that I really started to give myself permission, I think, to ask some of the questions. And actually it was Rachel Held Evans that gave me permission to ask the questions that I was afraid to ask, because I found her work. I found her blog back in 2008, I think was when I first encountered her. And I was working on some papers for a postmodern literature course, postmodern theory course, and was digging into, The Shack as a postmodern novel was one thing I wrote, and C.S. Lewis and postmodernism was a paper I wrote. And then I did a paper on the church, the really focusing in on evangelical church and postmodernism and the interactions there. So that led me into the reading about the emerging church movement that wasn't quite dead yet. And that was kind of how I found Rachel Held Evans. And it just kind of kept going from there. In I think 2011, 2012 is when I really started to dig deeper and go further with exploring my questions about, we can't really read all of this literally. We don't read all of this literally in the Bible, and what about the genocide accounts in the Old Testament? And what about, this whole prohibition against women in ministry, that never sat right with me. And I've done research on this, and and it was just one thing after another, but still not wanting to, lose Jesus. I was like, I can't quit Jesus. It's something I've started saying. I can't quit Jesus. And I don't want to. And I've found that I don't have to. But now I would describe myself as a progressive Christian. I feel like I need to qualify. I'm not an evangelical Christian, because people have certain ideas about what that means versus if I say I'm a progressive Christian. So I'm affirming of LGBTQ people, and I go to this progressive Baptist church that I didn't even know was a thing. I didn't know there were progressive Baptists, but there are. So yeah, it's been quite a journey for sure.
That's awesome. So let me ask you this: in your journey, what has been the hardest thing to leave behind?
I mean, it took me a really, really long time to feel like I had firmly 1000% landed in affirming theology around LGBTQ people and their relationships, because I was struggling. I don't want to throw out the Bible. I don't want to, I don't want to let go of my faith completely. But the only way I was taught to read this is that you have to take all of this literally, including the quote unquote clobber passages. So what do I do with this? And how do I, if I don't want to just reject the Bible as nothing more than man-written, documents, ancient documents, how do I do this? And I tend to say that I spent a long time trying to get all of my theological and hermeneutical ducks in a row, because I've been taught to be like, the queen of apologetics, right? I got to be able to defend my theology and defend the Bible. I got to defend God, right? Which, I mean, really, what kind of hubris does it take to think that we have to defend God anyway? So it becomes more about defending our own theology, which is, still something that is hard to, I think most of us on a human level, we want to be right, and we want to make other people think the way that we do. Oftentimes it's hard to move away from that kind of thinking. So I think, losing what I was taught, you had to believe in the inerrancy of Scripture, right? That it's inerrant, without error in the original manuscripts. Okay, what does that mean? And that doesn't mean your interpretation is flawless. But I think losing inerrancy and really firmly landing in affirming theology just took me a really long time, until probably sometime in 2018 is when I finally, like, I knew that's where I was going to end up for a while. I kind of saw that was where I was going to end up, but it just took me a long time to get there.
Yeah, no, I understand that. There's a lot of things where in my own journey where I'm like, for example, like I'm kind of Episcopalian now. And at some point I was like, I'm not going to be an evangelical that becomes Episcopalian. And then I was like, nope, this is where I ended up. Here it is. It's like, I kind of get the whole, like, you predict where you're going to end up a little bit. So I totally understand that. So, okay, let me ask you this. The whole point of this podcast is about the spirituality of being human. Now, you talked about how it was hard giving up inerrancy and really not necessarily hard loving LGBTQ people, but really coming to it. Right. But like coming to an affirming place from Scripture.
To defend it. Yeah. To be like, this is a legitimate way to interpret the Bible.
Right.
Yeah.
So why was that important, though? Why couldn't you just be like, oh, how am I trying to say this? Why couldn't you just be like, oh, LGBTQ people are great. I don't need to defend it. It can stay in mystery. Like, why was it?
With that.
You're not good with that. Okay.
I'm not good at, even though that is an important part of our faith, because at the end of the day, we can't fully know anything about God, that
Yeah.
might be a bit of an overstatement, but
No,
you
no,
understand
no.
what I'm saying.
It's really not.
There's
I totally get what you're saying.
yeah, we don't see God. We don't have tangible, like, physical evidence in front of us. We have the Bible, however we interpret it and whatever weight we place on it. We have the Bible as this collection of stories of people talking about their views on God and their experiences of God.
Hmm.
So we have that. We have personal testimony of other Christians throughout history and in current times of how they see God, how maybe they've had an experience or a vision, or, so we have these stories. But we don't, when I said that, I'm just like, I'm not good at embracing the mystery. I'm always trying to figure things out. I
Oh,
want to
yeah.
know what I believe about all the different topics in theology. I've done
Yeah.
these deep dives into, from views on the atonement to, back, I remember digging into Calvinism versus Arminianism versus open theism, and going
Right.
down these rabbit trails. And so I'm just, the way that my brain works and the way that I am, I'm like, I'm always trying to figure things out. I want to know where I stand. I want to know what I think. I want to know how to defend what I think from other Christians, maybe trying to say that I'm not a Christian now, or that
Mm.
because you don't get to make that call, first of all. Like, my relationship with God is between me and God.
Right, right.
Um, but yeah, so it was important for me to, I knew that once I started talking publicly about being affirming, I knew that I was going to get pushback
Mhm.
from my conservative friends and family. And I wanted to be able to defend my position. I wanted to be able to articulate the why, and not because I knew they would accuse me of just following my heart, right? Just like,
Yeah.
you're just capitulating to culture, and you're just, you're wearing your heart on your sleeve, and we're supposed to love the sinner, hate the sin, right?
Yeah,
Like, that
yeah.
nonsense. So yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question very well,
No,
but
no,
that's
it totally does. I
yeah.
get it, because what you're saying, what I hear you saying is it's important for you to to be able to defend it, because you're defending people you care about. That's what I hear underneath what you're talking about. Is that right?
I think that's part of it. I didn't really have people super close to me in my, everyday walking around life that I knew that were openly, uh, queer, gay,
Right.
any of the letters there. But I had gotten to know people on Twitter that,
Hmm.
the people that were gay, that were married to someone of the same sex, that were even in ministry, Rev Daniel on Twitter, that's,
Mm.
and Rev Jess Cast, I believe. Like, I was
Yeah.
encountering these people that are living their life as a gay person, and they're marrying people, and but they love Jesus, and they're, maybe they're even in ministry. And so I was forced to reevaluate what I'd been taught, because you know I'd basically been taught there's no such thing as a gay Christian, but I'm seeing evidence that that's not true. And
Yeah.
so yeah, but it was wanting to be able to kind of show my work, I guess, that
Yeah.
I didn't get here by just throwing out the Bible. I got here through much research and study and prayer. And this is my conviction is solid, and it's not in spite of God. It's because of God. It's because of the love of God.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally feel you. I kind of went through the same journey. What really tipped me over the edge was actually studying the Gentiles,
Mm,
and like the Spirit moved among the Gentiles without anybody doing anything. Like Peter was in the middle of preaching. He hadn't even gotten
mhm,
to like the altar call or whatever. And like the Spirit starts like pouring out on people. They start, speaking in tongues and doing all the crazy shit.
mhm,
And Peter's like, well, if God's doing this, I can't really say no. And then I
mhm,
looked around at like the people that I knew, that are LGBTQ, that are genderqueer, that are non-binary,
Mm-hmm.
and love God, and more than love
Yeah.
God, are being used by God.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'm like, okay, if God's doing this,
Yeah.
I can't say no to where the Spirit's moving. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, Sarah Bessie wrote about that idea too. In I believe the post is called the penny in the air, and it's her journey to becoming affirming. And she talks about seeing the fruit of the Spirit in the lives of gay Christians. And like, it's exactly what you're saying. Like, you just can't deny this person is filled with the Holy Spirit. This person is a Christian and they're gay. And hello, okay, that's so God
Yeah.
is here. God is moving. God loves, all of God's children, gay, straight, trans, non-binary, genderqueer, all
Totally.
everyone, no exception. And not only that, but that to believe that God made all of us in specific ways and doesn't
Yeah.
want to change us from those ways. The other thing that really made an impact on me was listening to a podcast it was on Pete Enns' podcast, The Bible for Normal People. And it was Jen Hatmaker talking with him kind of a little bit about her journey to becoming affirming. And she was talking about looking at the fruit of the theology. Is the non-affirming theology bringing life or death? Look at the suicide rates of homeless, look at the homeless rates of these gay kids and trans kids that are kicked out of their homes, of their conservative Christian homes because of the theology. It's just killing people. It's toxic theology.
Yeah.
It's, and so, yeah, is the theology bringing life or death? Look to the fruit, and that could point you in which way to go. So affirming theology, I see bringing life, bringing flourishing, bringing love, bringing wholeness. And non-affirming theology, I see the opposite. So
Totally. Okay, so let's take this in a little different twist. Affirming theology, you say you see it bringing wholeness.
mm-hmm.
How is it bringing wholeness to the physical body of LGBTQ people? Like the actual physical flesh and blood people?
Mm-hmm.
How do you see affirming theology bringing life, bringing wholeness, not just in a spiritual way of like, you can still love God, that's great, thoughts and prayers, but in like an actual, like, flesh and blood, rubber meets the road? How does an affirming theology matter in a
Mm-hmm.
physical world?
Well, I mean, again, if you are trapped in a system that says you are sinful because of who you are attracted to, or because deep inside that you are a woman, even though you were gendered as a boy when you were born, those things are causing harm to you in all kinds of ways as you're growing up. You're dealing with depression and anxiety, probably suicidal thoughts. I know people personally who would be able to tell you that as early as age 5, they were having suicidal thoughts, because of being trapped in this system and this toxic theology. So it matters on a very life and death kind of level, in terms of if you are trapped in a home, or even if you're an adult, but you're still, your support network, they aren't going to be able or willing to affirm you in the fullness of who you are, then that can still drive depression, which can, in the depths of depression, can lead to suicidal thoughts, or even actually dying by suicide. So I think it matters on a very life and death level, and beyond that, even if it won't actually kill you, just talking about the ability to flourish and be whole, and love and be loved by someone, or just healthy, flourishing human. All of that is impacted by whether or not you are being affirmed in who you are, or whether you're being told, no, that's not okay, that's wrong, that's fundamentally wrong, and you need to change. And then of course you can't change, because it's not how it works.
Everything you said, 100% agree, completely. There's something else too that I want to kind of dig into here a little bit. So we believe in the incarnation, like as Christians, we believe in the incarnation. We believe that Jesus became fully man while remaining fully divine and embodied humanity. Do you think Jesus's embodiment of humanity matters to LGBTQ people?
I mean, why would it not matter?
Because he was straight, or we read it as he was straight, I guess we should say.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think through this, like, okay, maybe this is my privilege showing, which it totally could be. I'm a white, cis, heteronormative male. When I read Jesus, unfortunately, I read him that way.
I mean, we don't have reason. I don't think we have a strong reason not to read him that way. But I mean, there's probably someone out there who has made a case for something else. So I think most people agree that Jesus wasn't married. He stayed single. That's interesting. That it makes sense that he knew. It seems like he knew his time was short. And he was very focused on his mission, on his goal, on cultivating his disciples and trying to teach them, and in the ways of the kingdom of God, and going about his ministry of teaching and healing. And so I think that the incarnation has significant theological implications for all of us, gay, straight, trans, bi, etc. Because the incarnation tells us that we are more than just spirit, that our bodies matter, right? Our flesh matters. And so rather than some kind of, was it the Gnostics that wanted to just forsake the flesh and, just not, or there's another one that I'm trying to think of, I guess the Stoics wanted to just cut off like emotion but no, we're fully, to be human is to be spiritual beings in a body, and like it's all connected. So whether we're struggling with our physical health, our mental health, our spiritual health, our emotional health, it's all connected. You can't, if you just treat one and don't work on the other, it's why it's part of why when people are seeking treatment for depression and anxiety, it's like, okay, go to a therapist and here's some medicine. Oftentimes it's like there's something physical, biological, chemical going on that medicine can help with, but there's other things going on that you probably need a therapist to work through things, and to and we all need community. We all need people in our lives to support us. Like, it's just, we're complicated creatures, we humans, right? So I think the incarnation matters for so many reasons, but it tells us that our bodies matter, that we're not supposed to aspire to some kind of only spiritual, existence.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. That's good. That's really good. Because honestly, like, I have a hard time, I guess, putting myself in the shoes of LGBTQ people and being like, why would Jesus matter to me? But what you said makes total sense. Jesus matters because he makes our bodies matter. And if our bodies matter, then our bodies as they are created, trans, bi, genderqueer, non-binary, straight, the body matters because, well, let's get a little bit sacramental here. The body matters because of the Eucharist, because of the body and blood of Christ. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's really good. Yeah. That's really good insight into that.
Well, there was something else. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
There was something else you said that made me think of, and it might have been your question right before this one, but it made me think of the book, The Body Keeps the Score, and how our bodies hold trauma, our bodies hold things and remember things maybe that we don't even consciously always remember. And
Right.
I remember, I think it was Audrey Assad talking about this at the Evolving Faith Conference in 2018. She mentioned that book, and she mentioned how being raised in a church system, in a theology that prohibited women from leadership, from being pastors, from being preachers, that her body, like she held that in her body, that it was like that it was that much harder to overcome and to lean into her own calling and her own just every everything she was made to be as a woman who was in music ministry in a sense, and to, she's up there speaking to us, but just to overcome this, what's held in our bodies. And so I don't know, there's just a weight to that I've talked before to different people about how I am more comfortable, obviously, in academics, right? I'm comfortable in intellectual conversations, and I've never been as comfortable in my own skin. And I've been working on that, but it's a process. And but it's why experiencing things like Ash Wednesday, growing up, my church didn't do that. We were evangelical, not liturgical. And so my first experiences with Ash Wednesday and walking down and having the pastor, put ashes on my forehead, it's just, that touches something. It connects the spiritual to your body, instead of there being this separation almost, that it's like we get from it's like we've incorporated the Greek dualism kind of thinking, where we want to keep the spiritual separate from our bodies, and it's like, no, again, it's all connected. So and the incarnation, I think, shows us that too.
Yeah, I totally agree. Going back to what you were talking about with the fruit of the theology, my buddy Brandon, who's going to be a guest later on in the season, he and I talk a lot about roots and fruits, about the idea of where something comes from and what it produces. Does it produce life or does it produce death? And everything you're saying to me just makes me think this whole idea of like the incarnation produces life. Like, if we really take it seriously, you know what I mean? If we're not just like, yeah, Jesus became a person, that's great. But if we're like, no, Jesus became a person and did something holy and something sacramental to people, there's life in that. So I'm going to shift gears here a little bit, but I want to ask you a little bit about your church experience. You said you go to a progressive Baptist church.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that, because I have never heard of a progressive Baptist church.
Yeah. There's they're not as rare as you might think. They're certainly outnumbered by the Southern Baptists, but my
I think
church
everybody's outnumbered by the Southern Baptists.
Fair point. Yeah, my church, it started out a Southern Baptist church, but back in the 80s, I guess, the Southern Baptists they didn't necessarily look exactly like they look today. I don't know if you are aware, but the Southern Baptist Seminary, that's a big one, is here in Louisville, Kentucky. And they basically had a changing of the guard sometime in the 80s, I believe, where there was more allowance for differences, for a spectrum of theology, a spectrum of conservative to more, not progressive the way that I mean progressive to describe myself, but in terms of at least women being allowed to be in ministry. There were churches that allowed that, and there were churches that didn't. There were professors that taught that was okay, and there were professors that taught that wasn't okay. But when there was a changing of leadership, they forced everybody out who wasn't conservative enough. And at that time, I think, is when my church in particular also kind of made a decision to, like, no, we're not gonna follow their lead. Like, I think I don't know if they already had women on staff or not, but they were supportive of it. And my church kind of became a safe haven for people that were fleeing the Southern Baptist churches that were getting more and more conservative, instead of some of them had been more moderate. And so that's kind of the history of, and I suspect that may be the case with other churches that are like mine in other cities. They probably started out Southern Baptist for the most part. But at some point, as things changed and there was less room for a spectrum of, opinions, they branched off. So
Okay.
The Cooperative Baptist Fellowship is, I know my church is loosely affiliated with that kind of, CBF is the organization, but I don't think CBF is all affirming all across the board. So anyway, but yeah, so my church in particular, they do some liturgical type things with
Really?
the order of service, with the it's not like an Episcopal church, but it's, it's more liturgy than I had experienced in other churches I've been in, in the evangelical world. So there's usually a call to worship where the pastor's reading part of it, or some leader on the stage is reading part of it, and we're reading part of it. There's the prayer confession, the words of assurance, but it's, again, it's not following the Episcopal reading per se, but they follow the lectionary, and they talk about the church calendar, and incorporate that in. And so, yeah, it's an interesting church experience for someone like me who grew up evangelical. But.
Yeah. No, I can imagine. I mean, I know when I started exploring liturgical churches, and when I started exploring the liturgy itself, it was a very different experience from what I grew up with. Because I grew up not in a Baptist church, but I grew up in like a charismatic fundamentalist church, which is a really weird combination, but there it is. Well, let me ask you this though. I'm curious. How does your church help you embody your spirituality? Like you said, they go through the church year, they do things like that. You said Ash Wednesday, things like that. But without the like highlights of the church year, like Good Friday, Ash Wednesday, things like that, Christmas, how just in general does being a progressive Baptist help you embody your spirituality?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it's the call to action, right? It's being involved in, kind of, there on the back wall. There's the verse that says to be doers of the word and not just hearers only. And so it's like the call to put it to the street, right? Take it to the street. Be involved in, there's a lot of people from my church that have been involved in the protests that have been going on in Louisville ever since the news first broke about Breonna Taylor.
Yeah.
And my church does this thing, I guess at Advent. I think it's at Advent every year, where they put crosses on the lawn and represent the number of lives lost to gun violence in our city in the previous year.
Oh, wow.
And so that's, again, a tangible thing that people go and do and help with. And this year, this summer, they did that, specifically representing the Black lives lost to police violence.
Wow.
And so they did that this summer. So there's a lot of, just kind of getting your hands and feet dirty opportunities for ministry in the city locally. They did a breakfast for LGBTQ youth back in the fall last year, I guess, and I think they do that every year. there's a lot of ways, depending on where your particular passions and giftings lie. There's a lot of ways to get involved like that. So I got involved with the young adult ministry and helped plan a fall retreat last year for the young adults. So again, just you have those, I guess, anytime that you're going and you're doing things with people and you're serving, and it's not, again, you're not just sitting around talking about theology. As much fun as that is for me, it's more than that. So
Wow, that's really cool. Yeah, so it sounds like your church, your community helps you embody your spirituality by actually doing shit.
right. Yeah.
Like not just like, here's some theories,
Yeah.
here's some stuff, but like, no, they're like, this is how we are doing shit. That's
Well, yeah. And I mean, I just heard a story from one of my friends. I don't know her super well, but I met her towards the beginning of when I started visiting this church, which was the beginning of 2018. And she was just telling me that, when she was pregnant and, not married, and there was no judgment from anyone at the church, that they just came around her to
really
support her, to help her, to make sure she had what she needed financially and with things to take care of the baby. And like, they were just there for her. They're just being the hands and feet of Jesus, right? That's what we're called to do. So that was,
that's
yeah.
crazy. No,
Yeah.
seriously, because like I don't care what church tradition you're in. The idea of the purity culture and the purity
Mhm.
movement has impacted so much beyond just evangelical, but like just our mentality of like who's clean and unclean, so to speak.
Yeah.
And you're telling me that a young unwed mother without the father was totally accepted and embraced, and not
Yeah.
only that, but was also like actually supported.
Yeah.
Like,
Isn't that
we're going
beautiful?
that is beyond beautiful to me. Like, that is
Yeah.
a picture of the Escalon. Like, that is
I mean,
like,
that's what the church is supposed to be, right? We're supposed to take care of each other.
yeah, we
Yeah.
are. So why do you think that we don't?
Because we're messy humans. We're messy humans, and as beautiful as it can be, we also can be selfish, and we can get stuck in our own pride, our own, of like, well, no, but this is what I was taught. This is it, this is what it has to be. We get messed up ideas about, some kind of concept of tough love. So what, tough love means you shun the person who needs your help? How's that going to bring him to Jesus? Like, it just
Yeah,
doesn't even make sense. But yeah, I mean, I think that we struggle to love each other the way that we're supposed to. We struggle with our differences with each other. If other people don't look like me, if they don't come from the same background, if they don't live their life like I think that everyone should live their life, we struggle to get over ourselves and our own,
mm,
expectations, or, whatever. I think there's just a lot of ways we mess it up, obviously, but there can be beauty. There can be, something better. And so stories like that give me hope that, yeah, it is possible to come together like that and really be Jesus to each other, really show the love of God to people.
totally. All right, let me ask you this. This is one of my pet peeve questions, like my favorite question to ask people.
Yeah.
But I think this fits with what you were just talking about. In light of this idea of what we can do to embody Jesus to people, because that's really what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
What does that do to your definition of the gospel? Like, what is the gospel if we're going to embody Jesus to people? What's the gospel?
It's become a little bit of a running joke in my Sunday school class that progressive Christians go to text is in Matthew when Jesus talks about separating the sheep from the goats, and talks about how if you gave anyone a cup of water in my name, like you were serving me. And if you, when you visited the prisoner, like that was me. And when you fed the hungry and you clothed the naked and you took care of the sick, like that was all done, in my name, and that was all done for me. And when you didn't do those things, that was me. You were not doing those things for. You were not. So it's so the gospel includes that, right? It's go into all the world. You think of the end of Matthew, go into all the world and preach the gospel to all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to do everything that I commanded you. Oh wait, what's he talking about? Go back to the Beatitudes and go back to what he just said about feeding the hungry and clothing the naked and taking care of the sick. It's, again, I think that theologically we want to separate things out, and different Christian groups want to harp on faith without works, but James says faith without works is dead. So we're not saved because of our works, but our works are proof that Jesus is in our life and the Holy Spirit is in our life, transforming us and making us more loving, right? I mean, I really think that's what it is, making us more loving. Love God and love your neighbor. That's the greatest two commands, right? So
yeah, no, totally. I'm just thinking, like that just makes me think of so many things, like, because what you're talking about is actually embodying the gospel, not preaching the gospel, not just like, here's the gospel in 4 easy steps, but like, here's the gospel, why don't you have dinner? You know what I mean? Like, it's totally different.
Bread
It's
together.
great.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Pull up another table. I love that song about wanting a crowded table by the Highwomen, I think is the group.
Oh yeah.
Like, I want a crowded table, and I think about inviting people in. Let's break bread together. Let's make the bigger table. Everybody's welcome.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so I got to ask you this because I know you're a C.S. Lewis nerd.
Yeah.
What would C.S. Lewis think about embodying spirituality?
I'm so glad you asked. I have I pulled some of my favorite quotes where C.S. Lewis. So there's a couple different directions that I could go. One thing that I thought of related to C.S. Lewis is how Lewis talks about the longing that we all have, that longing for more. In Mere Christianity, Lewis wrote, "If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." So he's constantly talking about the longings and the desires that we have for something more, something higher, something other, something we cannot identify. And Lewis says that proves the existence of God, of a higher reality that fulfills those longings. And but he also, in The Weight of Glory, he talks about how you've never met a mere mortal, because we are these spiritual beings, that all of us are image bearers of God. That's something we hadn't talked about yet, that I think is key to thinking about the spirituality of being human, is that every person is an image bearer of God. Everyone is made in the image of God. And so I'm trying to find the quote where Lewis talks about that. He talks about how, well, I'm having trouble finding the exact quote, but he says that if you could really see in your fellow human, if you could really see who they are, you could really see that they are made in the image of God. If you could grasp that, then you wouldn't be able to handle the weight of that glory. That's where the name of the sermon came from. And so, as usual, I can't quote it from memory, so you'll just have to trust me and go look it up yourself, because it's worth reading.
No, I totally know the quote you're talking about. Let me ask you this, though. Do you believe that?
Which part?
Do you believe that if you really got the idea that somebody was the image of God, that you wouldn't be able to handle it?
Well, I think what he means, it seems to me what he's saying is that would just, it would change the way, it would fundamentally change the way you treat people. If you
Mm.
really understood that, there would be this weight of seriousness, and not that you can't be playful with people, but
Right.
you wouldn't treat people like garbage. You wouldn't flip off the person in traffic because they cut you off. You wouldn't, like you wouldn't cuss them out. You wouldn't be rude to your server. If you
Mm-hmm.
really understood and believed that this is an image bearer of God, then like Oshita Moore talks about, you would tell a better story about that person that just cut you off.
Mm.
You would give that grace, and just, I don't know, we would love people better if we could really grasp that. So I guess that's how I kind of take that.
No, that is completely beautiful. That really is. Oh, I love that. I'm thinking of The Great Divorce,
Mm-hmm.
like where he talks about, heaven being something so substantial that those who aren't of heaven can't touch it.
Mm-hmm.
But by the same token, he seems to give this weight to people that we are capable of walking in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're not like,
When
it's
we
not.
become fully human.
Yeah, exactly. When we become fully.
Yeah. And that, again, I don't know if you've read Till We Have Faces by Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
So, until we have faces, until we're fully human, that's when we can really, that's when we can walk on the grass, because we won't just have these shadow feet anymore. We'll be fully human. We'll be able to bear being in the full presence of God. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful thing for the idea of, like, this is what it means to be human, is to fully be in the presence of God, like capable of fully being in the presence of God.
Mm-hmm.
There's just something so beautiful and weighty, the weight of glory, the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's something so weighty and so beautiful about that.
Yeah. He says, I think also in The Weight of Glory, he says that we want more than just to see beauty. We want to enter into it and become part of it. We want to be united with the beauty. We want to receive it into ourselves. We want to bathe in it and become part of it. That is why we have peopled air and earth and water with gods and goddesses and nymphs and elves, thinking about the fairy tales and the fantasy stories we tell. At present, we are on the outside of the world, the wrong side of the door. We discern the freshness and purity of morning, but they do not make us fresh and pure. We cannot mingle with the splendors we see, but all the leaves of the New Testament are rustling with the rumor that it will not always be so. Someday, God willing, we shall get in. So again, that's C.S. Lewis and The Weight of Glory.
Man.
And right, man, it's The Weight of Glory is one of my favorite. It's a sermon that he preached, and then an essay you can read, but it's it just fills me with that hope and that joy thinking about that. And again, just thinking about the spirituality of being human, I was thinking about how even people who don't claim to be spiritual, I think most of them would admit to having some kind of transcendent experience when they take in the beauty of nature, the grandeur of the mountains or the ocean or a waterfall. And they have these moments that feel higher, they feel richer, they feel more significant and glorious than normal everyday walking around life. But that then made me think of G.K. Chesterton, who was an author that C.S. Lewis really enjoyed reading. And G.K. Chesterton, he writes in Orthodoxy. He's got a chapter that's called like The Ethics of Elfland is the name of the chapter, which is just fantastic.
Okay.
But Chesterton says, he writes about the importance of story, and especially fairy tales, because he loves, we use the words charm and spell and enchantment, but Chesterton talks about being enamored by the idea that a tree grows fruit because it's a magic tree, and the sun shines because it's bewitched. And he says we like astonishing tales because they touch that nerve of the ancient instinct of astonishment. And he says this is proved by the fact that young children do not need fairy tales. They only need tales. Everyday life is interesting enough to a little kid. A child of 7 is excited by being told that Tommy opened a door and saw a dragon, but a child of 3 is excited by being told that Tommy opened a door. So Chesterton, right? So Chesterton writes, these tales say that apples were golden only to refresh the forgotten moment when we found out they were green. They make rivers run with wine only to make us remember for one wild moment that they run with water. Somehow in the process of growing up, we lose that sense of awe and wonder. We forget what it was like when everything around us seemed magical. And what is worse, we forget that we have forgotten. The fairy tales help us remember what we have forgotten. This is my words then, saying that the fairy tales help us remember what we have forgotten. And good stories help us do that. So think about how many of us love movies and television series, these stories that spark our imagination in a way that maybe a dry theology book doesn't. Although for me, theology does it too. But those stories. So yes, when you asked me to think about the spirituality of being human, I was thinking about all of these things because I'm so formed by all that I've read from C.S. Lewis and Chesterton. I can't help but think about those things and think about trying to, I guess, get back to that awe and wonder of the world around us, even in our everyday, even when we're stuck at home in a pandemic, that we can go outside and we can take in the grass and the trees and the sky and the sun and I don't know, feel some beauty and wonder at that, and that somehow connects us to God. And I've also been rereading Barbara Brown Taylor's book An Altar in the World, where she talks a lot about the incarnational kind of practice of the, just being grounded and being aware of the presence of God all around us. So
one thing you were saying when you were talking about G.K. Chesterton was about the tree, like the magic, like how a tree is magical.
Mm-hmm.
That made me think of earlier when we were talking about the idea of bearing fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a certain aspect of the fact that we are magical because we bear fruit. From our roots, we bear fruit. And that fruit is holy and it's good. There's something magical about humanity.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The way that we impact each other for good or for ill, the power that our words have for each other, the power to encourage or the power to tear down. We can make a huge difference in people's lives. We make a big difference in our friends' lives and our families' lives. Yeah, you're right. It's holy. I would say it's holy when we can love people and love people well. We can have really amazing impacts on people, and we don't always even have an inkling of what that even is. Sometimes we are privileged enough that someone will tell us, hey, this meant a lot to me and this is why, and then we are encouraged by what they're telling us. So.
Oh, totally. That's awesome. No, I love that. I love what you said about mystery, because you touched on mystery, you touched on magic, you touched on embodying. This has been such a good conversation.
I've been all over the place.
No, this has been so good. Well, it's about that time to wrap up, but I want to say thank you so much. So tell us, what are your socials? How can people touch with you? Because you've got a lot of good stuff to say. Tell people how to get in touch with you.
I'm fairly active on Twitter, and that's Jennifer Neyhart is my handle, and Neyhart
would you spell that for us? Yeah,
Neyhart is spelled Neyhart, and so it's Jennifer Neyhart on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, and my website blog that I need to write more, and I probably will. I've got, I was asked by my church to do a talk on what words of encouragement and wisdom C.S. Lewis would have for us in the moment of the pandemic. So I've got a video out there I need to put on my blog to make it easier for people to find it.
Do that because I want to watch it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
seriously.
I'll send it to you. Yeah. But yeah, I'm going to try to be more active on my blog here soon. Even though supposedly blogging died a long time ago, whatever.
Yeah, whatever. Blogging's not dead. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. You have a
Yeah.
great evening. Thank you for some boozy Jesus talk. And
Yeah.
we'll talk to you soon on Twitter, okay?
Sounds good. Thanks.